The next topic in the course is about routing, right? We have created different components. A web application can have any number of pages and each page can have components, right? Now, how do I navigate between the pages? Suppose I type a URL in my address bar. I want it to be mapped to a page. How do I do that? How do I navigate across my different routes that I have in my application? How do I define a route? How do I map this URL is pointing to this component? So all of these questions will be answered in this video. So in order to do routing, we have three main steps, right? Logically, we have broken down into three main steps. First thing is, what are the different possible URLs? What are the different possible routes that we have in our application? It can be slash users, slash profile, slash address. It can be any kind of routes that we have in our application. That is point number one. Point number two is we have to define the router outlets, right? Router outlet is nothing but you have your app module. You will have to define a placeholder that is going to dynamically rendered based on the route. For example, if it is slash address, the page that is there or the component that is there on your page should belong to the address component, right? If it is slash profile, the component that is there on the page should be a profile component. How is the router outlet defined, right? Next is adding links, right? How you can on click of each link you have to go to different pages, right? So how you can do that, right? So the three basic steps: one is configuring the routes, which path maps to which component. Second one is adding the router outlet. In your app you're going to say this is my placeholder where my components have to be rendered, which maps to a particular router state. The third thing is adding links. We'll see all these three steps one by one. Once you're done with creating a route, we will see how we can create router link with dynamic parameters, and then how we can deal with different kinds of parameters. It can be a path param or a route param, right? For example, user slash 10 slash address, right? Here slash 10 is a path param or a route param. It can be users question mark user id is equal to 10. In this case, user id is a query parameter. So we'll see the different ways of dealing with parameters. Right now, let's go back to a working example. The first step is, like we have used forms module, reactive module, and HTTP module, for routes we have to use the router module, right? So in order to do that, let's import the router module, right? So let's import the router module. Now, once we have imported the router module, we will have to say dot for route, right? So as you can see, it creates a module with all route providers and directives. Now, what is for route, right? For route is used to define the list of all route routes for our application, right? If you have a very complex and massive application, you can divide them into multiple modules, and each of the module is going to have a child route. Then in that case, we'll use for child, right? So in this is we have only one module and it's not a very massive application that we have. It's a very simple application, so we're using for route, right? So when you define for route, it takes an array of routes as input, right? And each route is an object, right, which has two properties with it. One is the path, right, of my route, and the next one is a component that is mapped to our route. In the previous videos, we had two simple components. One, we had an example observable component which we were just printing observer works. We'll take that as one component. Another component is user list component. We'll see how we can route to these two components, right? Say I'm going to say if observe, I'm going to map it to observe component, right? Likewise, if I have the route as user list, or if my path is user list, I'm going to map to user list component, right? Rest everything else is going to map to, say for example, observe component itself. We can also define routes like, right? Now you have created the configuration for your route. The next step is to add router outlets, right? So let's go to our app module and add router outlets. So this is my router outlet. Now I have provided the router outlet in the app component, right? I have also provided a simple header about the router outlet. This whatever I've given here as 3 anchor tags, right? This can also be a nav bar in your application. Or this can be a menu bar in your application, which is going to be the same throughout your application. For me, this is my nav bar now, right? So now when I click on observe, it has to go to observe component. When I click on user list, it has to go to user list component. So typically we will be giving it as href. So let's go back and see how it works. As you can see here, I click on observe component and the page renders. I click on user list component, my user list renders. I click on user list 10 component and again my user list renders, right? As you can see, my complete page is reloading here. It works. The route which we have configured actually works, right? So we are good here, but still my complete page is going to re-render. There are a lot of things in my page here, like a nav bar or a menu bar or a mini cart or a mini wish list, lot of things lying there which is not going to change for every click of my link, right? So in order to do that, we will have to, in order to fix this problem, we will have to use something called router link instead of href, right? So now let's change href to router link and see how it behaves, right? Now let's go back and try to do the same action. As you can see, the page does not reload here and you're able to render only that component which is changing. And also one more thing to observe here is, if you inspect this, whatever component which you have rendered as a result of a click is rendered outside the router outlet and it is not within the router outlet, right? So please have a note of it. Many times in the application, the values which you see here like 10 and 20 will not be hard coded. You will have to pass multiple parameters dynamically. So in order to do that, you can do property binding for router link like this, and you can pass a set of parameters which are array as a value. So the first argument or the first element in your array is the path, which is slash users, and the next element is the parameters that you want to pass. If you look at the screen, it is going to construct a URL like slash user slash 1234, right? Now, in order to have these kind of dynamic values in your route parameters, you would, when you're configuring your route, you have to specify something like this. You have to specify with colon and what is the name of the path parameter or the name of the route parameter which you're passing. This list can be any. You can even pass colon name, right? So you can pass any number of route parameters here and all of them will be available inside the route param map, right? Now we know how to create a route with dynamic parameter in it, one or more it may be. Now how to access them within the component. So in order to access those parameters, we can say this dot route dot snapshot dot paramap dot get, right? So if you can see, the route has a param map. So in order to have this kind of syntax worked out, you will have to have a field with activated route object, right? So once you have this, you will be able to access the parameters by using this dot route dot snapshot dot param map dot get, right? But this is one way of doing it, right? Let's go back to the browser and see what is the response now. I'm loading my page. It has printed user list component route param from snapshot 10, right? I'm clicking it. Next time it is supposed to show me 20. Now it's supposed to show me 10, but nothing happens, right? This is because the component does not reload, right? Your component does not reload, right? In cases where your component reloads, you should be using dot snapshot. In cases where you know that the user will be navigated away from your component and then your component destroys itself and then reinitializes, you will be able to use dot snapshot. But in cases like this, you will have to subscribe to the observables. You will have to observe the change in value of your param map. To do that, you will have to subscribe to the param map. If you see, this is not from a snapshot. This dot route dot param map dot subscribe. Right? Once you subscribe, whenever the value changes, you will be able to see even though the page does not refreshes. So let's go back and see. So you can see it prints 20, prints 10 because it prints just from the subscription, right? You can also observe the URL. So if there is an application where the change in route is not going to reinitialize your component, you can go for subscription. Whenever you have an application where you're never going to come back to the component again without refreshing the page, whenever you are destroying it and then reinitializing it, only then you will have to go for snapshot. These are the two different ways of accessing param map. Now, for example, if you're having a optional parameter as well, right? So in order to do that, let's say I have something called, let's pick up the button example itself. So here I want to append a question mark and say name is equal to ABCD. So to do that, I should say query params. Query params is another directive to which I can pass an object, and that object is going to contain a key value pair, right? And the key is going to be the name of the query param which I want to pass, which is name. For me, it is name. And the value which I want to pass is ABCD. Say there is another parameter which says age, and it is 12. I want my name to be enclosed in single quotes, right? Now let's go back and click the button and see how our page appears. So you can see the link that is formed is with the query params. Now I have created a URL with query params. Now how do I access this within the program? Like you have param map here, we also have query param map, right? So let me copy the same thing, and we have something called query param map. It's the same way you will be accessing your query param map, right? Now let's try to access name here. As you can see, we click this. Whenever I click on user list 20 component, there is no query param that is passed. So you can see query param subscription is null. And when I click on this, there is a query param and the subscription work and it prints ACD. So the logic to when to go for snapshot and when to go for subscription is decided based on whether the user will be navigating back to the component or not, right? Whether it's going to navigate away from the component and every time initialize and destroy, or he is going to navigate back to the component without invoking ng on it once again. Now in this case, I want to make a ajax call which takes arguments both from query param and route param, right? And how we have handled right now is by using two different subscriptions, right? Then I'll have to write code in two different places, right? But that can be avoided, right? We can combine both these observables into a single observable and then write the code for our API call within that. Now in order to do that, we will have to import a operator called combine latest, and also we will have to import the observable from rxjs, right? Now there is a static method in observable which is called combine latest. Observable dot combine latest, and it takes an array of observables. This dot route dot param map is our first observable, and our second observable is this dot route dot query param map, right? So we are going to combine these two observables together, and then we can subscribe to the combined observable. And within this, we will be able to access params of 0, which is our first observable, dot get id, because the router params has id. So as you can see here, we have combined both the observables and we have printed the id from the route param and name from the query param. Let's go back and see what happens, and we can now comment these two independent handling. We have handled it together, right? As you can see, in the combine mode, we are able to print both id and the name, and everything else works as expected. So this is how we will have to combine both the observables and handle it as a single subscription. I have combined these two observables and I have created a combined observable which has data which is required to make a API call, right? And my API call is going to return me a list of data, right? I have an observable, I use the data in the observable, and I get another observable which has data, right? So in that case, what we can do is we can either chain the observables, right? So that becomes a little bit of a messy code. So how can I chain it? So to do that, say for example, I want to invoke my user service here, right? Get users, right? So here I have hard coded the URL, but what if I want to construct the URL here and pass some parameters? What I would do is I do dot subscribe, right? So this is how I would do. Inside this, I'm going to write a few lines of code in order to do what I have to do, right? If you see, the code looks a little messy here. I have a subscribe, and inside the subscribe I have another subscribe, and this is a little bit of readability problem, and the code is not very straightforward also. So in order to ease the way in which we do, we have something called switch map operator. So with switch map operator, what we can do is, so what is a map operator? First of all, the map operator is going to create me a mapped object from a list of, or from a collection of values which we have, right? It is going to map and create a list of mapped object from our observable. It is going to convert from one observable to another observable. You have a list of numbers 1 2 3 4. I want a mapped object which is a multiplied value of 2. Then it creates 2 4 6 8, right? So here the map operator maps this observable to another observable by applying some operation over it, right? Likewise, we have something called switch map operator, right? So before subscribing to the latest combined latest observable, what we can do is we can say switch map dot switch map, right? So in switch map, I'm going to get output of the previous observable as the input for this, so which is nothing but my params, right? Say I can say combined params, right? And after applying this operator, I have to return return an observable, right? So I'm trying to convert from one to another. So what action I have to do here is, this is where I have to make my API call, right? So say for example, these are the parameters which are going to help me form my URL, and then say I have this dot service dot get users, right? So my get users is going to return me a observable. Now I can return this now, and I can subscribe to this observable now, and I can do any handling that I want to do here, right? Now if you look at, the code looks very clean, right? It looks very sequential, it looks very much readable, right? So let me just summarize this a little bit. So first, we had a separate param map and we had a separate query params map. We combined both into a single observable by using the combine latest operator in the observable, right? Once we had combined, we wanted to use the params from the observable in order to make an API call, right? So initially we wrote it in the subscribe method itself, but that was making the code a lot more not readable format. So we wanted to make the code better. So what we did was, since we had to convert an observable into another format, we wanted to convert the params observable into a list of users observable. We had used the switch map operator, which is going to map this observable into another observable, which is the list of users. So we use a switch map operator. And the input to the switch map operator is my combined observable output, and then we have used the parameters from there. We returned the observable from the this dot http dot get operator, and then inside that we are going to handle this dot users is equal to response dot json of data. So with this, we have made the code a lot more readable. So this is the use of the switch map operator, right? The last topic which we are left with is how to do programmatic navigation, right? So far we have seen how we can construct the routes in the HTML or in the template itself. What if, as a result of this API call, I want to do a navigation, right? I want to check some conditions and then I want to do the navigation. In order to demonstrate that, I have created a print user ID button here. So whenever I click this, I want to navigate to another link, right? So let me hard code a link here and let's see how we can programmatically navigate to another link. Whenever I click on user/10, I want to navigate to the observer component, right? Let's go to that and see. In order to do that, like we had an activated route field here, we need to have a router here, right? So let's import the router, right? And then I have a button on click of which the save user is called. So in this, we can say this dot router, right? Dot navigate, right? If you check the navigate, it is going to take an array of parameters, right? The first is going to be the link to which we want to navigate, right? And another is the list of query params, right? Which is an object. I can pass whatever param I want to pass here. Name is ECD and age is say 12. We have not mentioned that this is a query param object. So in order to do that, we have to enclose this within the object. So the router.navigate method takes an array of parameters as input, in which the first element is the path which we want to navigate it to. The second element is an object among which we have to mention whether it is a query param or not, and we have to pass the list of query params here, right? Now when you go back and when you click on print user ID, you can see it is constructed as a query param, and this is how you programmatically navigate between links.